They say kings die with dignity, that when the final hour comes, a monarch is surrounded by priests, banners, and loyal men. But in the dead of night, behind the cold stone walls of Berkeley Castle, a king screamed. Edward II, a ruler betrayed by his wife, humiliated by his court, and discarded by a nation that had once called him God's chosen. What happened in that dark chamber was so horrific, so unholy, that even the royal chroniclers refused to write it down. The official records claim he died peacefully, but the truth was smothered under blood-stained sheets and whispered through the centuries. And tonight, I'm going to tell you exactly how England's most tormented king met his death. Subscribe now if you believe no king's scream should be silenced, because history lies, and we're about to tear those lies apart. There are deaths that history records, and there are deaths that history whispers about, too ashamed to write them down. This is one of those stories. It begins not with a crime or a rebellion, but with a love that broke a kingdom. Edward of Caernarfon, the son of the mighty Edward I, was never supposed to be a bad king. He was tall, charming, athletic. He preferred music to war, conversation to conquest, the company of men to the company of his scheming barons. But in a medieval world, where a crown was won with blood and held by fear, those were fatal flaws. And then there was Piers Gaveston. Imagine it. A king so enamoured with one man that he made him Earl of Cornwall, gave him royal lands, and seated him at the council table, while England's war-hardened barons seethed. The chronicles say Edward called him brother, friend, and favourite above all others. The court was scandalised, and the punishment came swiftly. In 1312, Piers was dragged from his hiding place, mocked and beheaded on a lonely hill by the men who claimed to serve their king. And Edward II, he wept. He vowed revenge. And he made a promise to himself that no one would ever separate him from his chosen companions again. That promise would destroy him, because when Piers was gone, another family slithered into Edward's confidence, the Despensers. And where Gaveston had been charming, the Despensers were cruel, greedy, and ruthlessly ambitious. But here's the detail your history books leave out. England wasn't just ruled by a reckless king. It was ruled by a wife with the heart of a wolf, Isabelle of France. Daughter of a king, sister to a king, and now queen to a man who barely spoke her name. And when Edward took Hugh Despenser as his favourite, he banished Isabella's allies, confiscated her lands, and humiliated her before the court. a queen in name only, a woman scorned. And so she waited, and she plotted. And in 1326 she struck. Isabella, with her lover Roger Mortimer at her side, invaded England with a small force of mercenaries and exiled lords. The barons starved of justice, the people crushed by taxes, they flocked to her banner. Edward II, deserted by all, fled into the night like a hunted animal, captured, deposed, and imprisoned in the cold, damp chambers of Berkeley Castle. And there, history tells us, his nightmare truly began. But before we get to that night and the infamous death that would stain England's history forever, if you believe forgotten victims like Edward II, men erased by the powerful, deserve their story told, hit that subscribe button now. Like this video if you refuse to let history's most grotesque betrayals be buried. And share it so no one forgets the king murdered not with an axe, but with the kind of cruelty only the living can inflict. Subscribe, like, share, and remember, this is just the beginning. Berkeley Castle was built to keep people out. In 1327, it became famous for keeping one man in. Edward II, king no longer, is led through its gates under heavy guard. A fallen monarch, stripped of crown and title, marched past jeering peasants and silent soldiers. It was said that as the gates clanged shut behind him, the castle itself fell silent, as though the very stones were ashamed. He was thrown into a chamber so cold and dark, it was called the Hell Room by the servants. Its walls dripped with damp, its only light a sliver from a high barred window. And for company, the shrieks of owls, the moaning wind through ancient stones, and the distant toll of church bells that would never again ring for him. But it wasn't solitude that Edward feared. It was who controlled the key. Here's what the history books won't dwell on. Berkeley Castle wasn't just a prison. It was a death sentence. Carefully, strategically planned. His jailers weren't faceless men. They were Thomas de Berkeley, Edward's own nephew by marriage, and Sir John Maltravers, a man rumoured to have enjoyed torturing prisoners for sport. Both men acted on direct orders from Isabella of France and Roger Mortimer, and the instructions were chillingly precise. The late king must be kept in such manner that he shall see no man, nor be seen by any, and that he shall be put in secret places wherein he shall be most securely kept. In plain English, no witnesses, no mistakes, no evidence. In the days that followed, Edward was fed scraps, mouldy bread, spoiled meat, water thick with grit. His clothes were never changed. His hair grew wild. His beard matted. They say the rats grew so bold, they gnawed at his fingers as he slept. And yet, he clung to life A deposed king is dangerous as long as he breathes. Isabella knew it. Mortimer knew it. But Edward had always been stubborn, and no one defies death quite like a desperate man. They tried poison, but Edward's stomach, long accustomed to poor food on campaign, held strong. They tried starvation, but he chewed on straw, moss, anything he could find. And so the order came. Let it be done in such manner that none may know how he died. And that's when the horror truly began. But before we descend into what happened next, the screams in the night, the infamous act of cruelty whispered in medieval halls. If you believe men like Edward II, broken but defiant, deserve their stories told, hit subscribe now. Like this video if you refuse to let the powerful bury the bodies of those they destroy. And share it, because the silence of history is where the monsters thrive. And we are here to drag them into the light. Subscribe, like, share. It matters. In the damp darkness of Berkeley Castle, Edward II counted the days by the toll of distant church bells. At first, there were prayers, then bitter pleas, then silence. They say madness comes gently in such places, like mist seeping under a door. But Edward wasn't mad. He was afraid, and with good reason, because outside that chamber, John Maltravers was making preparations. The chronicles speak in riddles, but in one private letter, hastily written, hidden in a chapel wall, a monk named Anselm left a single gut-wrenching line. The king cries out most piteously at night, and none dare answer. And here's where the cruelty deepens. His jailers would leave the castle's hunting hounds tied beneath Edward's window. Night after night, the animals howled and snarled, the sound of their hunger filling the chamber like a living thing. The King of England lay shivering on straw, the former ruler of an empire reduced to a trembling, starved wretch, as dogs screamed for food just feet from where he lay. It was no accident. It was a message. Even the beasts eat better than you now. The townsfolk spoke of strange happenings. Flickering lights in the upper windows. Pale, robed men slipping in after dusk. And one evening, the bell at the gatehouse rang 3 times. A signal. The executioners had arrived. Not men of the block, but specialists. Men paid not to kill, but to erase. They carried no axes, no swords, no ropes, only a brazier and a long, hollow iron rod. The guards whispered the nickname for what was coming, the red-hot poker. But history, of course, is careful with such things. You won't find it in official chronicles. They prefer the phrase, done away with in secret, and none knew how he died. Yet the people knew. The monks at St. Peter's Abbey recorded something else in the trembling hand of a man too frightened to sign his name. A cry was heard, so terrible, it was thought the walls would split. The earth itself recoiled. It happened in the dead of night, and when the scream finally stopped, no one dared open the chamber door, not until dawn, and by then, the damage was done. On the night of September 21st, 1327, the skies over Berkeley Castle turned black. Thunder rolled across the moors, and servants crossed themselves as the storm gathered. It wasn't the weather they feared. It was the chamber at the heart of the keep, the Hell Room. At midnight, the guards outside claimed the air grew so cold, their breath hung like mist. Inside, Edward II waited. He had no reason left to hope, only the dull certainty of what was coming, and it came. The door opened. No words were spoken. 3 figures entered, faces hidden, hands gloved. One carried a brazier, another a hollow iron rod, its tip already glowing a wicked orange. The third carried a cloth to muffle the screams. What happened next was so grotesque that even medieval chroniclers, no strangers to violence, struggled to record it plainly. Edward was thrown down, pinned. The red-hot iron plunged into him. The purpose was simple. No blood, no marks, no outward wound. A death that could be called natural. But the scream betrayed them. A single inhuman sound, so piercing, so terrible, that even the guards at the gate, a quarter-mile away, heard it. At the chapel, the monks halted their prayers. One wrote later, "A cry was heard from the castle, so full of agony that it seemed heaven itself should strike down those responsible." And then, silence. They left the room in darkness, the king's body smouldering in the cold. No one dared approach until dawn. And when they did, Edward II was gone. What remained was something no man should witness. But here's the truth modern history textbooks won't mention. The murder of Edward II wasn't just an assassination. It was a warning. A message to every noble in England. Defy the new order, and this fate awaits you. And for a time, it worked. Mortimer rose. Isabella ruled as Queen Mother. And England was theirs. But the dead don't rest easy, and neither do their crimes. And if you believe those who suffer at the hands of the powerful deserve their names remembered, if you refuse to let these crimes vanish into clean, courtly fairy tales, subscribe now. Like this video if you believe Edward's voice deserves to echo beyond those castle walls and share this story, because what they did to him, to countless others, is the real horror buried beneath crowns and castles. Subscribe, like, share. Let the dead speak. I'm mourning. The castle was silent. No bells, no cries, no servants bustling through the corridors. Just the oppressive hush of something terrible having passed. When the chamber door finally opened, the jailers entered as men who already knew what they would find. The air hung thick with the sick, sweet stench of burned flesh. Edward II lay cold, his face frozen in a mask of terror, his mouth still open in the shape of that final scream. They wrapped the body quickly. No prayers, no ceremony. The corpse was bundled in coarse cloth and laid in a plain wooden coffin. The order was clear. No viewing, no relics, no relic thieves. A broken king was no saint, but even in death, Edward II posed a problem. Because while the deed had been done in secret, the scream had carried, and England was a country of whispers. Within days, rumours bled through the taverns of Gloucester and Bristol. The peasants said the old king had been murdered. The nobles said it was justice, but the truth was darker still. A letter surfaced, smuggled from within Berkeley Castle's walls. Written in hurried Latin, it read, "The king is dead, in means so cruel that neither tongue nor pen may rightly describe it. God have mercy on us all." It was unsigned, but those who saw it claimed to know the hand. A monk, a witness, a man too haunted to stay silent. The letter disappeared within days. Some say Mortimer's men found him, tore the confession from the chapel wall, and buried the monk's body in an unmarked grave. Others claim the letter still exists, locked away in a cathedral archive, too damning to be made public. And here's the truth court records won't admit. The red-hot poker was never a rumour. It was a message. A warning whispered in darkened halls for generations after. "Remember Berkeley," they would say, "and choose your friends with care." For a time, it worked. Queen Isabella and Roger Mortimer ruled England like a queen and king, in all but name. The boy king Edward III, just 14, was a royal puppet. His mother sat on the throne beside him, Mortimer at her ear, the court bowing to them both. The death of Edward II was officially recorded as natural causes. And yet, the kingdom did not forget. Every countryside tavern held the story. Every castle hall traded whispers. The king had screamed, and death had answered. But power purchased by blood is never safe. Edward III was no fool. He watched. He waited. He learned the language of betrayal, having lived with it since boyhood. At 17, the young king struck on a cold night in 1330. Edward III's men burst into Nottingham Castle, seizing Mortimer in his chamber while Isabella wept and begged for his life. No trial, no defence. Roger Mortimer was dragged before a hastily gathered council, condemned for treason, regicide, and something the record keeps obscure. Some chroniclers mention it delicately, the cruel demise of our late sovereign. But one, a bitter clerk in the Tower of London, put it plainly: for the burning of his master's flesh, he shall hang by the neck and rot upon the gallows. And so he did. November 29, 1330. Mortimer was hanged at Tyburn, his corpse left dangling for 2 days. Isabella was spared execution, but stripped of her power, sent to live out her days in luxury-tinged exile at Castle Rising. The new king made no public mention of his father's true death. But on the anniversary of Edward II's murder, Edward III fasted in private, alone, for the rest of his life. An unspoken ritual, a silent admission. The scream from Berkeley had not been buried after all. It echoed in his blood for centuries. That was where the story ended. The mad king dead, the usurper hanged, the queen disgraced, the boy king victorious. History neatly packaged. But England is a land where the soil keeps secrets. And in the years after Edward II's death, something strange began to happen. Sightings. A bearded man in a tattered cloak seen in remote monasteries. A prisoner hidden in a distant Welsh fortress, his name erased from records. A foreign knight who spoke flawless English but claimed no homeland. Rumours, hushed confessions, half-erased letters. And then, a discovery. In 1855, workers restoring the crypt of St. Mary's Church in Gloucester found a hidden stone tomb. Its lid unmarked. Inside, a skeleton. Badly burned. The bones of a man in his late 40s. The age Edward II would have been if he'd survived his supposed death. The jaw showed signs of a healed break, matching an injury the king suffered in youth. The wrists were marked by old manacle scars. Officially, the remains were dismissed as an unknown ecclesiastic. Unofficially, they were Edward, smuggled from Berkeley Castle after the botched murder, hidden in the cellars of loyal monks, buried without name or title. The final insult. A king denied his grave. And if you think that sounds like fantasy, know this. A letter survives in the Vatican archives, dated 1330, from an English priest who fled abroad. It reads, "Our rightful sovereign yet lives, scarred but breathing. His tormentors believe him gone, but God's will defies them." Is it real? A forgery? Or a final act of guilt from a man who witnessed horror and couldn't bear the silence? We'll never know. But one thing is certain. The scream from Berkeley Castle was only the beginning. And in England's cold, restless soil, some kings never sleep. Time is cruel. It sands down horrors into rumours, bleeds the blood from old stone, leaves only a name on a plaque and a date no one remembers. But some stories refuse to fade. The scream from Berkeley Castle, the one no chronicler dared record, is still there if you know when to listen. On storm-soaked nights, the locals claim you can hear it. A man's voice, high and sharp, echoing from the cold walls. A final howl from a king betrayed by his wife, his friend, his nation. Edward II, the king who was not meant to be king. The boy mocked by his court. The man broken by war and love. The prisoner silenced by cruelty. And yet, in some way, he won. Because long after Isabella's death, long after Mortimer's broken body was thrown to the crows, long after Edward III's bones turned to dust in Westminster, we're still speaking his name. Not in reverence, not in love, but as a warning. A reminder that power unchecked is monstrous. That betrayal never truly dies. That the sins of kings are written in the earth and sky. And that even now, somewhere beneath the crumbling walls of Berkeley Castle, a forgotten grave waits to be found. The man it holds was no saint. He was not a hero. But he was a man. And he screamed. If this story chilled you, if you believe forgotten victims of power deserve to be remembered, then subscribe, like, and share this investigation. Because for every Edward, there's 1,000 silenced voices lost to history. And it's time we found them. Subscribe if you believe the dead should never be buried without justice, and that history's ghosts deserve a voice.